Have you ever wondered if animals truly understand when we're in danger? Imagine this. A severely injured horse stands defiantly in the middle of a desert highway, refusing to move despite dozens of honking cars. Why? Because his human is trapped miles away, fighting for his life. This isn't fiction. It happened on Route 191 in Arizona. And what this horse did next shocked even the most experienced wilderness experts. In the next 10 minutes, you'll discover how Dusty, a horse once scheduled for euthanasia, outsmarted everyone to orchestrate one of the most remarkable rescues in national park history. If you think you know the limits of animal intelligence, this story will change everything you believe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want more incredible true stories that prove the extraordinary connection between humans and animals. Let me take you to that scorching Arizona highway where our story begins. The July sun beat down mercilessly on Route 191, a two-lane highway cutting through the harsh beauty of northeastern Arizona's high desert. Heat waves shimmered above the asphalt, distorting the distant views of red mesas and weathered buttes that jutted dramatically against the cloudless blue sky. At 3:47 p.m., what started as an ordinary Tuesday afternoon quickly transformed into something extraordinary. Traffic ground to a complete halt roughly 15 miles south of the Petrified Forest National Park entrance. But this wasn't your typical fender bender or construction delay. "What in God's name is that?" muttered Dave Hoffman, a local delivery driver, as he leaned forward over his steering wheel, squinting through his windshield. The CB radio in his truck crackled with confused chatter from other drivers. Standing defiantly in the center of the northbound lane was a dust-covered Palomino horse. Its golden coat was barely visible beneath layers of red Arizona dirt and what appeared to be dried blood on its right flank. The animal's right front leg was held slightly aloft, obviously injured, yet there was something in its posture that seemed almost deliberate, purposeful, even. Tammy Reeves, a kindergarten teacher from Holbrook on her way home from a doctor's appointment, was the first to call 911. "Yes, that's right," she explained to the dispatcher, her voice rising with concern. "A horse. In the middle of Route 191. No, not on the shoulder, in the actual road. No, I don't see any ranch nearby. We're miles from anywhere, and it looks hurt. No, it's not moving. It's just standing there, like it's waiting for something." As the minutes ticked by, a peculiar calm settled over the scene. No one honked. No one attempted to drive around. A respectful distance formed as motorists pulled to the shoulder and stepped out of their vehicles, phones raised to capture the surreal tableau. "Don't get too close," warned Miguel Sanchez, a retired park ranger who had stopped his RV several cars back. "Injured animals are unpredictable, could be dangerous." But the horse didn't appear aggressive. Despite its obvious distress, its sides heaving with labored breaths, foam flecking its muzzle, and that concerning injury, its eyes remained alert, scanning the growing crowd with an unsettling intelligence. "Look at its leg," whispered Lisa Chun to her husband as they stood beside their rental car. "That's not good. And there's something around its neck. See it? Some kind of tag or something." The horse's ears twitched at every sound. The slam of a car door, the murmur of concerned voices, the distant wail of an approaching siren. Yet it remained steadfast, occasionally pawing at the ground with its good front hoof. "Somebody must be looking for it," offered a trucker with a Texas accent. "Gotta belong to someone." As the sound of the siren grew louder, the horse's head lifted slightly, its gaze fixed on the approaching vehicle. The animal seemed to be waiting, not panicked, not attempting to flee, but deliberately standing its ground on the scorching pavement as traffic backed up for nearly a mile in both directions. What nobody yet realized was that this wasn't just a lost horse. This was Dusty, and he had a mission that would soon change lives forever. The Apache County Sheriff's Department vehicle kicked up a cloud of dust as it pulled onto the highway shoulder. Deputy Rachel Monroe stepped out, adjusting her tin uniform hat against the unforgiving sun. At 34, Rachel was no stranger to unusual calls, but this one had piqued her interest enough to respond personally instead of passing it to animal control. "Dispatch said there's a horse causing a traffic jam?" she asked, approaching a state trooper who had arrived minutes earlier. "Yes, ma'am. Strangest thing I've seen this month," replied Trooper Jenkins, gesturing toward the animal. "Won't budge. Animal control's at least 40 minutes out. They're dealing with a rattlesnake situation at an elementary school in Holbrook. Rachel's green eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. Her 5 years with the department had taught her to look beyond the obvious. Standing at 5 feet 7 inches with sun-weathered skin and auburn hair tucked into a tight bun, she projected the quiet confidence that had earned her respect in a department dominated by men. "Has anyone approached it?" she asked, removing her sunglasses. "Few people tried. Gets agitated when they do. But it's not running off either. Just standing there." Rachel moved closer, her boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. The horse's eyes tracked her movement, its ears swiveling forward with apparent interest. "Hey there, big guy," she said softly, her voice slipping into the gentle tone she reserved for her own horse's back at her small ranch outside of Springerville. "What's got you all worked up today?" The horse nickered softly, then took a tentative step toward her, favoring its right front leg dramatically. Rachel noticed the dried blood on its golden coat and winced at the severity of the injury. A deep laceration just above the knee, caked with dirt and showing early signs of infection. "You need a vet, friend," she murmured, holding her ground as the animal approached. That's when she noticed something reflecting sunlight around the horse's neck. Not a bridle or halter, but something different. A metal tag fastened to a weathered leather strap. "Can someone get me a bottle of water?" she called over her shoulder, keeping her eyes on the horse. "Slowly, please." A tourist hurried forward with a plastic bottle. Rachel poured some into her palm, offering it to the thirsty animal. As it drank, she gently reached for the tag with her other hand. "Hold on there," said a deep voice behind her. Rachel turned to see a man in his early 40s wearing the olive-green uniform of the National Park Service. His name badge read Bennett. "Careful, deputy. That horse isn't just injured, it's distressed." "Park Ranger Bennett, I assume?" Rachel asked, recognizing the authority in his stance. "Cole Bennett," he confirmed with a nod. "I was patrolling the southern boundary when I heard the call. Thought I might be useful." His dark eyes studied the horse with professional interest, the lines around them deepening as he squinted against the sun. "I grew up on a ranch," Rachel said firmly. "I know how to handle horses." Bennett moved closer, his 6 feet 2 inches frame casting a shadow that seemed to calm the agitated animal. "No disrespect intended. But that tag, may I see it?" Rachel carefully turned the metal plate to read its inscription. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "PFNP, WR 042, she read aloud. "What does that mean to you, Ranger?" Bennett's face paled slightly. "It's one of ours. Petrified Forest National Park, Wilderness Registration. That's a backcountry hiking code." He paused, studying the horse with renewed interest. "We don't issue these to horses. They're for human hikers in case of emergency. How did this animal get one?" The horse stomped impatiently, then winced as its weight shifted onto the injured leg. "Someone's missing," Rachel concluded, her law enforcement instincts kicking in. "This horse belongs to someone who's registered for backcountry hiking in your park." "Or riding," Bennett corrected, pulling out his radio. "I need to call this in immediately." As Bennett stepped away to make the call, Rachel noticed something else. The distinctive pattern of a saddle's pressure points on the horse's back, though no saddle remained. This wasn't just any horse. This was someone's trail companion, far from where it should be. "Where's your rider, boy?" she whispered, a sense of foreboding settling over her like the gathering storm clouds on the distant horizon. The crowd of onlookers had grown, their vehicles forming an impromptu parking lot along the highway shoulder. The horse had finally allowed Rachel to examine the metal tag more closely, revealing numbers and letters that increasingly troubled Ranger Cole Bennett as he returned from making his radio call. "We've got a situation," Bennett announced, his voice lowered as he joined Rachel beside the horse. "That tag number, it's registered to Dr. Ethan Walker. He's a wildlife biologist specializing in large mammal rehabilitation. Signed in 2 days ago for a 3-day backcountry survey." Rachel studied Bennett's weathered face. "I'm guessing he wasn't alone if he brought a horse." "That's just it," Bennett replied, glancing at the curious bystanders before continuing. "According to our records, he was solo. 1 man, 1 horse. Special permit for equestrian access to study the feral Mustang population on the eastern boundary." Rachel brushed away a persistent fly from the horse's wounded leg. "So where's Dr. Walker now?" The horse's ears perked up at the mention of the name. "Did you see that?" Rachel whispered. "He reacted to the name." Bennett nodded slowly. Horses know their owners' names, especially working horses. A paramedic who had arrived on scene approached with a canvas bag. "Mind if I take a look at that leg, deputy? I've worked with large animals before." Rachel stepped aside as the paramedic, his name tag reading Martinez, carefully examined the wound. "This isn't fresh," he reported. "I'd say this injury is at least 24 hours old. And look here," he pointed to several smaller cuts along the animal's flank. "These are consistent with pushing through dense brush or falling." "The backcountry has some treacherous spots," Bennett added. "Steep drops, hidden canyons. If Walker got thrown or the horse spooked." Rachel's radio crackled to life. "Monroe, this is dispatch. I've got the park superintendent on the line requesting to speak to Ranger Bennett. They're confirming a potential missing person situation." Bennett took the radio. "This is Ranger Bennett." "Go ahead, sir." The superintendent's voice came through with the static of distance. "Cole, Dr. Walker missed his scheduled check-in last night. We weren't immediately concerned because of his experience level, but with his horse showing up injured on the highway, I'm officially declaring this a search and rescue operation." The gathered crowd murmured as they caught fragments of the conversation. "We'll need to set up a command center," Rachel said decisively. "Get search teams organized before dark. That gives us," she checked her watch, "about 4 hours of daylight." A state trooper approached, clearing his throat. "We need to clear this traffic situation, deputy. I can call a livestock trailer to transport the horse to a vet." The horse suddenly lifted its head, nostrils flaring as if sensing a new threat. It took an awkward step backward, nearly losing balance on its injured leg. "Wait," Rachel said, holding up her hand. "Something's not right." Bennett watched the horse intently. "He doesn't want to leave." "That's ridiculous," the trooper argued. "It's an animal. It doesn't understand what we're—" "I've worked with search and rescue dogs," Rachel interrupted. "They can lead you to missing persons. What if—" She turned to Bennett, her eyes widening with realization. "What if he's trying to tell us something?" Bennett considered this. Working horses are intelligent, especially those trained for backcountry work. They're taught to return to trailheads if separated from riders. Rachel approached the horse again, speaking softly. "Are you trying to show us something, boy? Where's Ethan? Where's your human?" As if understanding, the horse whinnied and took a painful step toward the east, away from the highway and toward the distant mesas. Bennett's radio crackled again. "Ranger Bennett, we've got a ping on Dr. Walker's emergency beacon. Very faint, intermittent signal approximately 8.2 miles east-southeast of your position in the Black Forest area." The horse nickered and stomped its uninjured front hoof, as if confirming the information. "I'll be damned," whispered Bennett. Rachel looked at the wounded animal with newfound respect. "This isn't just a stray or runaway. This horse is trying to get help for his rider." "Dr. Walker is known for his experimental training techniques," Bennett admitted. "He's published papers on emergency response conditioning in equines." Rachel made a quick decision. "I'm following this horse. If there's even a chance he can lead us to Dr. Walker faster than a conventional search." Bennett nodded grimly. "I'm with you, but that leg won't carry him back 8 miles. "We don't need him to go all the way," Rachel replied, already pulling emergency supplies from her vehicle. "Just enough to point us in the right direction. We can bring water, a basic medical kit, and I've got detailed topographic maps of the area," Bennett added, opening his pack. The horse watched their preparations with an almost human-like intensity, its intelligent eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun as dark clouds began gathering on the eastern horizon. Time was running out, and somehow, this extraordinary animal seemed to know it. By 5:15 p.m., the Apache County Sheriff's Department had officially declared Dr. Ethan Walker a missing person. The makeshift command center, consisting of 2 patrol cars, Ranger Bennett's truck, and an arriving search and rescue van, buzzed with activity at a highway pullout as Rachel studied a topographic map spread across her hood. "The last recorded ping from his emergency beacon was here," Bennett said, pointing to a remote area marked with a red X, Black Forest Mesa. Rugged terrain, limited cell service, and virtually no foot traffic this time of year. Rachel studied the map, tracing potential routes with her finger. What exactly was Dr. Walker researching out there? Bennett's expression grew thoughtful. "Ethan's not your typical academic. 38 years old, former Army Ranger turned wildlife biologist. He specializes in rehabilitation programs for rescued horses, particularly those from illegal trafficking operations. His current project involves training techniques for wilderness emergency response. You know him personally? Rachel asked, catching the familiar way Bennett spoke of the missing man. We've crossed paths, Bennett admitted. He's consulted for the Park Service before. Brilliant mind, sometimes too brilliant for his own good. Takes risks most researchers wouldn't. The search and rescue coordinator, a grizzled veteran named Jim Thorpe, joined them. We've got two problems, he announced without preamble. First, that storm system is moving in faster than predicted. Second, the terrain where that beacon pinged is a maze of slot canyons and false trails. Even experienced SAR teams could take hours to navigate it in daylight, let alone with darkness approaching. The wounded horse, which had been standing patiently nearby under the watchful eye of a volunteer with veterinary experience, suddenly lifted its head and nickered loudly. He's been doing that every time we mention the location, Rachel observed. I still think he's trying to tell us something. Deputy Monroe, Thorpe said with thinly veiled skepticism. With all due respect, we can't base a search and rescue operation on horse whispering. Bennett interceded. Actually, Jim, Dr. Walker's research specifically involves training horses to recognize emergency situations. I've reviewed his protocols. He conditions them to associate certain paths with safety and to seek human assistance if their rider is incapacitated. You're saying this horse might actually know where Dr. Walker is? Thorpe asked incredulously. I'm saying it's not outside the realm of possibility, Bennett replied firmly. Rachel's phone rang. She answered, listened intently, then hung up with a grim expression. That was dispatch. They've pulled Dr. Walker's registration information. Turns out our missing biologist has a medical condition, type 1 diabetes. If he's been stranded without supplies for nearly 48 hours. The implications hung heavily in the air. We need to move now, Bennett said decisively. Standard procedures will take too long. Rachel nodded in agreement, turning to face Thorpe. I propose a two-pronged approach. Your team can follow standard search patterns from the last beacon location, while Ranger Bennett and I follow the horse's lead. If he's been trained as Dr. Walker's research suggests, he might take us straight to him. Thorpe frowned. The animal can barely walk. We're not asking him to carry anyone, Rachel explained. Just to point us in the right direction. Maybe reveal a shortcut your maps don't show. A young park volunteer approached with her smartphone. Excuse me, but I think you should see this. She handed the phone to Bennett. It's an article Dr. Walker published last year in the Journal of Animal Cognition. It details his work training horses to respond to emergency scenarios. Bennett skimmed the abstract, his expression shifting from doubt to possibility. According to this, Walker's program had an 87% success rate in controlled tests. The horses were specifically conditioned to find roads or ranger stations when separated from their handlers. That explains why he was standing in the middle of the highway, Rachel said, pieces falling into place. He wasn't just wandering. He was deliberately seeking human help where he'd been trained to find it. The horse stomped its uninjured front hoof again, almost impatiently. I'm going with the horse, Rachel announced, her tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. Ranger Bennett, are you with me? Bennett nodded firmly. I know that terrain better than anyone here. Thorpe sighed in resignation. Fine. Take Gomez with you. He's our medical specialist. But you maintain radio contact every 15 minutes, and you turn back at the first sign that this theory isn't panning out. Rachel was already gathering her gear, checking her sidearm, and securing extra water bottles to her belt. Deal. And Jim? Have a medical evacuation team on standby. If we find Dr. Walker, he's likely to be in critical condition. As the first distant rumble of thunder echoed across the desert, the wounded horse lifted its head toward the darkening eastern sky. Something in its determined stance told Rachel they were making the right call, conventional wisdom be damned. Bennett approached the animal carefully, offering his hand. Ready to lead us to your human, boy? As if understanding perfectly, the horse nickered softly and turned toward the wilderness beyond the highway's edge. The transition from asphalt to desert happened in an instant. One moment they were standing on the highway shoulder surrounded by vehicles and concerned onlookers. The next, they were following a wounded horse into the harsh wilderness of northeastern Arizona. The command center and its bustle of activity quickly fell away behind them. "Still think this is a good idea?" Rachel asked, adjusting her pack as she navigated around a cluster of prickly pear cactus. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, transforming the red dirt into a deeper crimson. "Ask me again in an hour," Bennett replied, his eyes never leaving the horse that limped steadily ahead of them. Despite its injury, the animal moved with surprising determination, occasionally pausing to look back as if making sure they were still following. Miguel Gomez, the SAR medical specialist, maintained a respectful silence as he trailed behind them, his medical backpack substantially heavier than their gear. At 30, the former combat medic had seen enough to know when to question authority and when to simply observe. "So this Dr. Walker," Rachel said, breaking the tense quiet as they crested a small rise. "You said he's working on some kind of horse training program?" Bennett nodded, using his canteen to wet a bandana before tying it around his neck against the heat. "Ethan believes that with the right conditioning, horses can be taught specific emergency protocols, not just carrying injured riders to safety, which they've been known to do instinctively, but actively seeking help when separated from their handlers." "And you believe that's what this horse is doing?" Gomez finally spoke up, skepticism evident in his tone. "I believe something is driving him," Bennett replied. "And at this point, I'll take an injured horse's instincts over wandering blind through this terrain." The horse, Dusty, as they had taken to calling him based on his condition, suddenly stopped, his ears perking forward. The animal turned his head sharply to the right, away from the gentle slope they'd been following. "What is it, boy?" Rachel asked, approaching carefully. Dusty nickered softly, then deliberately began moving toward what appeared to be a solid wall of sandstone and scrub brush. "There's nothing that way," Gomez protested. "The map shows a sheer rise for at least half a mile." Bennett studied the horse's behavior, then scanned the terrain more carefully. "Maps don't always tell the whole story out here. Flash floods reshape the landscape every monsoon season." Rachel pointed toward a subtle break in the vegetation. "Look there, is that a game trail?" As they approached, what had appeared to be impenetrable brush revealed itself as a narrow pathway, barely visible unless standing directly before it. Dusty had already started limping down this hidden trail, pausing again to look back at them with an almost human impatience. "I'll be damned," Gomez muttered. The horse actually found a shortcut. The path wound between towering sandstone formations, gradually descending into what Rachel realized was a dry wash, a route carved by centuries of flash floods. The packed sand made for easier walking, though the walls of the wash rose steadily on either side. "This could be dangerous if that storm hits," Bennett warned, glancing at the darkening sky. "Flash floods can fill these channels in minutes." "How much farther to where the beacon was last detected?" Rachel asked. "About 4 miles as the crow flies," Bennett replied. "But the actual hiking distance could be double that with all the twists and turns." Dusty continued forward, his injured leg clearly causing him pain, yet his determination never wavered. The horse would occasionally stop, ears rotating like radar dishes, before choosing his next direction with surprising confidence. "I've seen search dogs work, but never anything like this," Gomez admitted, his earlier skepticism softening. After nearly 40 minutes of walking, the wash opened into a broader valley flanked by weathered mesas. The storm clouds now loomed directly overhead, the distant thunder becoming more pronounced. "We need to pick up the pace," Bennett urged, checking his GPS. "We're still a good 2 miles from the beacon's last location, and that storm isn't waiting." Dusty suddenly froze, his entire body tensing. Rachel instinctively reached for her sidearm, scanning for potential threats. Mountain lions were known to inhabit these remote areas. "What is it?" she whispered. The horse pawed at the ground, then lifted his muzzle high, nostrils flaring. Without warning, he let out a loud, piercing whinny that echoed off the canyon walls. Silence followed. Then, faintly, they heard it, an answering call, not from another horse, but unmistakably human. "Hello? Help! Down here!" The voice was weak but clear enough to galvanize all 3 of them into action. "Where's it coming from?" Gomez demanded, already unslinging his medical pack. Dusty answered by limping forward with renewed energy, leading them toward a dense thicket of mesquite and juniper that appeared to grow along a depression in the landscape. "Dr. Walker," Bennett called out. "Ethan, keep shouting so we can find you." "Here, I'm down. I'm in a ravine." Rachel moved ahead, following Dusty as the horse picked his way through the brush with surprising agility despite his injury. As they pushed through the final stand of vegetation, she suddenly grabbed Bennett's arm, yanking him back. "Careful," she warned, pointing at what the brush had concealed, a steep drop-off, nearly 15 feet down into a narrow gully. And there, pinned beneath a fallen tree trunk at the bottom of the ravine, was a man. His face was sunburned and streaked with dirt, his left leg trapped at an unnatural angle. But he was alive, looking up at them with a mixture of pain and profound relief. "Took you long enough, Dusty," the man said weakly, a ghost of a smile crossing his parched lips as the horse nickered in response. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Rachel and Bennett exchanged looks of amazement. Against all odds, the wounded horse had done exactly what its training had prepared it to do. It had saved its human's life. "We need to get down there, now," Gomez said, already assessing the steep drop-off for the safest descent route. The first raindrops had become a steady patter, darkening the red soil and making the terrain increasingly treacherous. Rachel uncoiled a length of rope from her pack. "I'll secure a line. Bennett, radio the command center and update them on our position." She worked quickly, anchoring the rope around the trunk of a gnarled juniper tree that clung tenaciously to the ravine's edge. Bennett stepped away to make the call, his voice rising above the intensifying wind. "Command, this is Ranger Bennett. We've located Dr. Walker. He's alive but injured, approximately 5.7 miles east-southeast of Highway 191. We're in a narrow ravine that doesn't appear on standard maps. Requesting immediate medical evacuation." The radio crackled with static. "Copy that, Ranger. Be advised, helicopter evac is grounded due to approaching storm. Mobile medical unit dispatched to your last known coordinates. Estimated arrival time 2 hours. 2 hours might be too late," Gomez muttered, testing Rachel's rope. "That ravine will flood if this storm hits full force." Below them, Dr. Walker raised a weak hand in acknowledgement. "The tree," he called up, his voice barely audible above the wind. "It shifted during the night. I think my leg's broken, can't move it." Dusty, the injured horse, paced anxiously at the edge of the ravine, occasionally pawing at the ground and nickering softly to his trapped owner. "I'm going down," Gomez announced, slinging his medical pack across his chest. "Deputy, can you follow with the extraction equipment?" Rachel nodded, already securing a second line. She turned to Bennett. "See if you can find a gentler slope, somewhere we could potentially carry him out without climbing straight up." As Gomez began his careful descent, Rachel took a moment to study their surroundings more carefully. The path they had followed, the one Dusty had led them along, wasn't random at all. Now that she examined the ground with a tracker's eye, she could see evidence of previous passage. Boot prints partially filled with wind-blown sand, broken branches on desert shrubs, even a small piece of fabric caught on a cactus spine. This was his route in, she realized aloud. The horse isn't just leading us to Walker. He's retracing their exact path from 2 days ago. Bennett returned, his expression grim. "The storm's accelerating. Command says we've got maybe 40 minutes before the heavy rain hits this sector." "Look at these," Rachel said, pointing to the signs she'd discovered. "Ethan's tracks. He came this way deliberately." Bennett knelt to examine the evidence. "You're right. But why would an experienced wilderness expert like Ethan take such a dangerous route?" Below, Gomez had reached Dr. Walker and was performing a rapid trauma assessment. Dehydration, exposure, probable compound fracture of the left tibia, possible internal injuries from the compression, he called up. "He's conscious but disoriented." Rachel began her own descent while Bennett continued studying the surrounding area. Halfway down the rope, she paused as something caught her eye, a weathered wooden stake driven into the ground near where the tree had fallen, with a small metal tag similar to the one around Dusty's neck. "Bennett," she called, "there's a survey marker down here." When she reached the bottom, the situation became clearer. The ravine wasn't a natural formation, at least not entirely. It had been expanded, with crude steps cut into one side and what appeared to be the remnants of an old research station on a small ledge nearby. "It's a paleontological site," Dr. Walker explained weakly as Gomez worked to stabilize his injured leg. His voice was raspy from thirst, his lips cracked and bleeding. I was documenting evidence of unauthorized excavation when the storm hit. Flash flood undercut the tree. I tried to move, but Rachel offered her canteen, helping him take small sips. Ethan Walker was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, with sun-streaked brown hair now matted with dirt and blood from a gash on his forehead. His eyes, though clouded with pain, remained alert and intelligent. "Dusty?" he asked between sips. "Is he okay?" "Injured leg, but he led us straight to you," Rachel replied. "He went to the highway just like you trained him." A ghost of a smile crossed Walker's face. The emergency response protocol. It actually worked. Above them, Bennett called down. "I found a potential exit route about 60 yards north. Gentler grade, but we'll need to move quickly." Thunder rolled directly overhead now, and the first alarming sign appeared, small rivulets of water beginning to trickle down the ravine walls. "We need to move him now," Gomez said urgently. "That leg needs proper setting, but there's no time. I'll stabilize it for transport." Using an inflatable splint and painkillers from his medical kit, Gomez worked rapidly to prepare Dr. Walker for movement. Rachel helped cut away the smaller branches pinning his body while Bennett secured their exit route. "Dusty found you on the road," Walker said to Rachel as they worked, his voice stronger after water and pain medication. "Just like we trained. Highway means people. People mean help." "He was standing in the middle of Route 191 like he owned it," Rachel confirmed. "Wouldn't budge. Smart animal." "Not just smart," Walker murmured. "He's proof that proper conditioning can create predictable emergency response behaviors in equines." That horse just validated 2 years of research. A sudden rush of water swirled around their boots. The rainwater was beginning to collect in the ravine floor. Philosophical discussions later, Gomez interrupted. "We need to move. Now." With painful slowness, they freed Walker from the fallen tree and secured him to a portable stretcher. The water level had risen to their ankles by the time they began making their way toward the gentler slope Bennett had located. Above them, Dusty continued to pace the ravine edge, following their movement as if supervising the rescue operation. Despite his own injury, the horse had remained steadfastly on guard. As they struggled up the muddy incline with their injured charge, Rachel couldn't help but marvel at the extraordinary chain of events. A wounded horse standing in the middle of a desert highway had led them across miles of wilderness directly to its injured handler, navigating hidden trails, avoiding hazards, and ultimately saving a man's life through what could only be described as unwavering loyalty and remarkable training. The storm unleashed its full fury as they finally reached level ground, rain lashing at them horizontally in the gusting wind. But Dr. Ethan Walker was secure on the stretcher, and Dusty stood watchfully nearby, his mission accomplished against impossible odds. The makeshift shelter offered minimal protection against the raging storm. Bennett had quickly rigged a tarp between 2 juniper trees, creating a small haven where Gomez could properly assess Dr. Walker's condition away from the worst of the downpour. Rachel maintained radio contact with the command center, though the signal faded in and out with the storm's intensity. "BP's 100/60, pulse 110 and thready," Gomez reported, working methodically despite the challenging conditions. "Dehydration is severe, and that leg needs immediate surgery." He administered fluids through an 4-line while checking Walker's pupils with a penlight. Through chattering teeth, Dr. Walker remained remarkably lucid. "How's my horse?" he asked for the 3rd time in 15 minutes. "Dusty's fine," Rachel assured him, glancing at the Palomino standing stoically just beyond the tarp's edge, seemingly unbothered by the rain soaking his golden coat. "Though I'm still amazed he found his way to the highway with that injured leg." Walker attempted to sit up before Gomez firmly pressed him back down. "That's exactly what he was trained to do," the biologist explained, wincing as pain shot through his broken leg. "Highway equals humans equals help. Basic associative conditioning, reinforced through repetitive scenario training." Bennett returned from checking their surroundings, rainwater streaming from his hat. "Mobile medical unit reports they're bogged down about 2 miles west. The wash we followed in is completely flooded now." "Of course it is," Gomez muttered, adjusting Walker's foredrip. "We're not getting him out of here anytime soon, and this leg can't wait much longer." Walker's eyes found Rachel's through the dim light of their emergency lanterns. "My research pack," he said suddenly. "Did you find it?" Rachel shook her head. "We were focused on getting you out of that ravine before it flooded." "It's important," Walker insisted, his voice growing stronger. "Field notes, sample collection, photographic evidence of illegal fossil poaching. That's why I was out here in the first place." Bennett kneeled beside the stretcher. "Ethan, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. How did you end up trapped in that ravine?" Despite his condition, Walker's eyes became sharply focused as he recounted his ordeal. "I was conducting a dual-purpose expedition, wildlife monitoring combined with investigating reports of unauthorized paleontological excavation in restricted areas. 2 days ago, I discovered fresh digging at a known fossil bed." He paused, grimacing as Gomez adjusted his splint. "You were alone?" Rachel asked, recording details in her waterproof notebook. "Intentionally," Walker confirmed. "Didn't want to tip off the poachers. I documented everything, collected GPS coordinates. Then the weather turned, much faster than forecast. Dusty and I sought shelter in that ravine, but the flash flood was more violent than anticipated. Undercut the roots of that cottonwood tree. And it fell on you," Bennett finished. Walker nodded weakly. "Threw me from Dusty first. The tree caught my leg. I managed to activate my emergency beacon, but it was damaged in the fall. Must have been sending intermittent signals at best." Smart Horse remembered his training, though, Rachel noted, watching as Dusty periodically looked in their direction, standing guard despite his own injury. "He stayed with me all night," Walker said, his voice softening with obvious affection. "Kept trying to pull the tree off with his teeth. That's probably how he injured his leg. By morning, I realized we were both in trouble. That's when I gave him the command." "Command?" Gomez asked, momentarily pausing his medical assessment. "Find the road," Walker explained. "It's the emergency protocol we developed." I attached my wilderness registration tag to his halter and told him to find the road. He attempted a smile through cracked lips. "Honestly, I wasn't sure it would work outside of our controlled testing environments." Rachel exchanged glances with Bennett. "Well, it certainly did. He planted himself in the middle of Route 191 and wouldn't budge until help arrived. And then led you straight back to me," Walker added, pride evident despite his weakened state. "Followed our exact route, didn't he?" Bennett nodded. "Trail for trail. Even found shortcuts we wouldn't have spotted." The radio suddenly crackled to life with unexpected clarity. "Ranger Bennett, this is command. Helicopter evacuation has been approved despite weather conditions. Air National Guard dispatching Black Hawk with medical team. ETA your position 17 minutes. Prepare landing zone if possible." The tension in their small shelter instantly dropped. Bennett grabbed the radio. "Copy that, command. We'll mark the LZ with emergency flares." As Bennett and Rachel moved to secure a landing zone in a small clearing nearby, Gomez continued monitoring Walker's condition. "Your horse just earned you a ticket out of here," the medic said. "Those pilots are risking a lot flying in this weather." Walker's eyes drifted to where Dusty stood steadfastly in the rain. "He's more than just a horse," the biologist murmured. "He's proof that with proper training, animals can perform complex emergency protocols. The implications for wilderness safety, search and rescue operations." "Save the grant proposal for when you're not bleeding internally," Gomez interrupted, though his tone was gentle. "Right now, let's focus on getting you both out of here alive." 15 minutes later, the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors cut through the storm's fury. The National Guard Black Hawk appeared through the clouds like an industrial angel, its spotlight sweeping the clearing where Rachel and Bennett had established a crude landing zone marked by chemical flares. As the medical team rushed toward them with a proper stretcher and advanced equipment, Rachel found herself standing beside Dusty. The horse watched the proceedings with remarkable calm, unfazed by the helicopter's noise and wind. "You did good," she told the animal, gently stroking his mud-caked neck. "Really good." The Palomino turned his intelligent eyes toward her, and Rachel could have sworn he understood every word. In that moment, she realized she was witnessing something extraordinary, not just a heartwarming tale of animal loyalty, but perhaps a genuine breakthrough in how humans and animals might work together in life-or-death situations. As they loaded Dr. Walker onto the helicopter, the biologist insisted on one final request. "Dusty comes too," he called out weakly. "He needs veterinary care." And he's earned it. The flight medic looked ready to object until Bennett stepped forward. That horse is the only reason we found Dr. Walker in time, the ranger stated firmly. He's part of this rescue operation. If there's space, he deserves evacuation as much as any human member of this team. After a brief radio consultation with base, the helicopter crew made an unprecedented decision. With careful maneuvering and a makeshift sling, they secured the injured Palomino in the helicopter's cargo area. As the Black Hawk lifted off into the turbulent sky, Rachel watched horse and rider being evacuated together, a fitting end to one of the most remarkable rescue operations she'd ever participated in. The fluorescent lights of Flagstaff Medical Center cast harsh shadows across the hospital room where Dr. Ethan Walker had been recovering for 3 days. His left leg, now properly set and encased in a blue fiberglass cast, was elevated on a pillow. The surgery to repair his compound fracture had been successful, though doctors warned he faced months of physical therapy. Rachel Monroe knocked softly on the open door before entering. "You're looking better than the last time I saw you," she remarked, setting a small potted cactus on the windowsill. Walker's face brightened immediately. "Deputy Monroe, I was hoping you'd stop by." His color had improved dramatically, though deep fatigue lines remained etched around his eyes. "Thought you might like an update on your four-legged hero," Rachel said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "The vet says Dusty's leg is responding well to treatment. No permanent damage, though he'll need several weeks of rest." "That's the best news I've heard all day," Walker sighed with evident relief. "They wouldn't tell me much over the phone. Hospital policy apparently doesn't extend to horse patients." Rachel smiled. "Well, Ranger Bennett and I made a special trip to the equine hospital in Holbrook this morning. Dusty's quite the celebrity there. The staff can't stop talking about the hero horse of Highway 191. Walker adjusted himself in the bed, wincing slightly. "The media's calling already. National Geographic, Animal Planet, even some morning shows in New York." "You're about to become famous," Rachel observed. "Not me," Walker corrected. "Dusty. And the program. This is the validation we've been working toward for years." He reached for a tablet on his bedside table, tapping the screen to bring up a document. "The Emergency Equine Response Protocol. 2 years of research, countless training hours, all based on a theory that most of my colleagues dismissed as wishful thinking." Rachel leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Tell me about it. How does a horse learn to find help like that?" Walker's eyes lit up with academic passion. "Horses are flight animals by nature. Their instinct is to run from danger, not toward it. But they're also incredibly intelligent and form strong bonds with their handlers. The ERP works with both these natural tendencies." He swiped through several photos on his tablet, showing Dusty in various training scenarios. "We start by associating roads with safety and human presence. Then we gradually introduce stress factors, separation, unfamiliar terrain, obstacles. Each successful completion reinforces the behavior." "And the tag around his neck?" Rachel asked. "Dual purpose," Walker explained. "It's both a visual marker for humans to recognize an emergency situation and a tactile reminder for the horse. Dusty was trained to understand that when that tag is attached, his mission is to find help." Rachel shook her head in amazement. "And he remembered all that training, even with a painful injury, even after watching you get trapped under a tree. That's what makes this case so significant," Walker said, his voice taking on the measured tone of a scientist despite his obvious enthusiasm. "This wasn't a controlled test. This was a genuine life-or-death emergency, with multiple compounding factors: Dusty's own injury, unfamiliar terrain, a violent storm, and nearly 48 hours without food or proper water." A nurse entered briefly to check Walker's vitals, then departed with a reminder about medication schedules. "There's something else you should know," Rachel said once they were alone again. "The fossil poaching operation you were investigating? Your documentation led to 3 arrests yesterday. Professional thieves who've been looting protected sites across 3 states." Walker's eyebrows rose in surprise. "They found my research pack. Better than that. The memory card from your camera was still in your pocket when we found you." Bennett recognized its significance and turned it over to the Park Service's Law Enforcement Division immediately. A look of satisfaction crossed Walker's face. "So it wasn't all for nothing." "Not by a long shot," Rachel confirmed. "But there's something I've been wondering. Dusty isn't a wild horse, obviously. Where did he come from? Walker's expression softened. He was a rescue, part of a group seized from an illegal slaughterhouse operation in Oklahoma 3 years ago. Severely malnourished, signs of abuse, deemed unadoptable due to behavioral issues. He paused, looking toward the window. He was scheduled for euthanasia when I found him. And you saw something in him? I saw a survivor, Walker said simply. An animal that had every reason to mistrust humans, yet still responded to kindness. The perfect candidate for the program. Rachel considered this. From death row to hero. That's quite a journey. He can't go back to the wild now, Walker admitted. The program was initially designed to help rehabilitate rescue horses for eventual release, but Dusty's too habituated to humans. And after this injury, what will happen to him? Walker's face brightened. That's another piece of good news. The Park Service has expressed interest in adopting him officially, making him an educational ambassador for their wildlife programs. Apparently, Ranger Bennett made quite a passionate case on his behalf. Rachel smiled, remembering Bennett's uncharacteristic emotionality when describing the horse's heroism to the evacuation team. He was impressed. We all were. There's something profound about an animal choosing to help a human in distress, Walker reflected, especially one with every evolutionary instinct telling it to run the other way. It challenges our assumptions about animal cognition, about the boundaries between instinct and learned behavior. A thoughtful silence fell between them, broken only by the muted hospital sounds from the hallway. I have a small ranch outside Springerville, Rachel said finally. 2 other horses, plenty of space. If Dusty needs somewhere to recover while you're in rehab. Walker's eyes widened in surprise. You do that? Rachel shrugged, slightly embarrassed by her own impulsive offer. Let's just say he made an impression on me. Never seen anything like him before. Neither has the scientific community, Walker replied with a hint of pride. And now, thanks to this incident, they'll have to take the research seriously. He extended his hand toward Rachel. Thank you for the offer and for following his lead out there. Most law enforcement officers would have dismissed the whole scenario as ridiculous. As Rachel shook his hand, she thought about that moment on the highway. The injured horse standing resolute against traffic, somehow knowing exactly what it needed to do to save its human companion. It was a story she would tell for the rest of her career, though she suspected few would truly understand the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Outside the hospital window, storm clouds had given way to the brilliant blue Arizona sky, stretching endlessly over the high desert landscape, where an extraordinary horse had rewritten the rules of what was possible. 6 months after the dramatic rescue on Route 191, the Petrified Forest National Park Visitor Center buzzed with unusual activity. Park rangers in their distinctive olive green uniforms directed a steady stream of visitors toward the newly constructed outdoor pavilion, where rows of folding chairs faced a small stage adorned with the National Park Service emblem. Rachel Monroe, dressed in her formal Apache County Sheriff's Department uniform, stood near the back, watching the gathering crowd with quiet satisfaction. She spotted Dr. Ethan Walker near the stage, his left leg still supported by a walking cane, deep in conversation with Ranger Bennett. Although Walker had largely recovered from his ordeal, the severe fracture had left him with a permanent limp, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to losing his life in the wilderness. Quite the turnout, remarked a voice beside her. Rachel turned to find Miguel Gomez, the SAR medic who had helped rescue Walker. He was out of uniform today, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt. Half the county's here, Rachel agreed. Plus media from Phoenix, Albuquerque, even some national outlets. All for a horse, Gomez said with a bemused smile. Not just any horse, Rachel corrected. The first official wildlife rescue ambassador for the National Park Service. The crowd's murmuring quieted as Park Superintendent Maria Vasquez approached the microphone. A respected 25-year veteran of the Park Service, Vasquez had immediately recognized the educational and public relations potential of Dusty's story. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, members of the press, thank you for joining us today for this historic occasion, Vasquez began. The Petrified Forest National Park is proud to officially launch our Wildlife Ambassador Program, an initiative that combines conservation education with innovative approaches to wilderness safety. As Vasquez continued her speech, Rachel's attention drifted to the side of the stage, where a temporary corral had been constructed. Inside stood Dusty, his golden coat gleaming in the Arizona sunlight, fully recovered from his injuries. The horse seemed remarkably at ease with the crowd, occasionally nodding his head as if acknowledging the proceedings being held in his honor. Today's ceremony is only possible because of an extraordinary series of events that unfolded last July, Vasquez continued. Events that demonstrated not only the remarkable bond between humans and animals, but also the groundbreaking research being conducted by Dr. Ethan Walker and his team at the University of Arizona's Equine Behavior Research Center. Applause rippled through the audience as Dr. Walker was invited to the podium. He moved with careful deliberation, still adjusting to his altered gait. "Thank you, Superintendent Vasquez. And thank you all for coming," Walker began, his academic demeanor softened by genuine emotion. What began as a research project to rehabilitate rescue horses has evolved into something far more significant than I ever anticipated. Walker briefly recounted his harrowing experience: the investigation of fossil poachers, the unexpected storm, the crushing weight of the fallen tree, and the agonizing decision to send his injured horse for help. When I attached my wilderness registration tag to Dusty's halter and gave him the command to find the road, I was operating more on desperate hope than scientific certainty, Walker admitted. The protocols we had developed had shown promise in controlled settings, but had never been tested in a genuine emergency. He paused, looking toward the corral where Dusty watched with those intelligent eyes that had so impressed Rachel during the rescue. What happened next wasn't just a validation of our research. It was a profound demonstration of what's possible when we work with animals as partners rather than simply as resources or specimens. Dusty not only found his way to a highway despite his own injuries, but then led rescuers back through miles of wilderness directly to my location. A park ranger opened the corral gate, and Dusty calmly walked to Walker's side without any visible guidance. The crowd murmured appreciatively at the horse's disciplined behavior. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Emergency Equine Response Protocol has received full funding from the Department of the Interior and the National Institutes of Health for a 5-year implementation study across multiple national parks and wilderness areas. Applause interrupted Walker's speech. When it subsided, he continued with clear pride. But perhaps more importantly, Dusty, once deemed unadoptable and scheduled for euthanasia, will serve as the living embodiment of this program as the Park Service's first official wildlife rescue ambassador. The ceremony continued with the formal presentation of a specially designed halter bearing the National Park Service emblem and Dusty's new official designation. Superintendent Vasquez explained how the horse would participate in educational programs throughout the Southwest, helping to teach wilderness safety to school children and park visitors alike. After the ceremony, Rachel approached Walker as he stood beside Dusty, receiving congratulations from well-wishers. Quite a change from that day on the highway, she observed when the crowd around him had thinned. Walker smiled, patting Dusty's neck affectionately. From desperate rescue to national celebrity, I'm not sure which of us is more surprised. How does it feel, seeing your research validated so publicly? Validating, Walker admitted with a small laugh, but also humbling. This was never really about academic recognition. It was about finding ways to give rescue horses like Dusty a purpose, a second chance. Rachel nodded toward Walker's cane. "How's the recovery going?" "Slower than I'd like, faster than the doctors expected," he replied pragmatically. "I'll never run a marathon, but I'll be back in the field within another month or two. Limited capacity, of course." "And the fossil poachers?" "Facing federal charges. Your documentation of the crime scene was impeccable, by the way. The prosecutor specifically mentioned it." Rachel shrugged modestly. "Just doing my job." She reached out to stroke Dusty's muzzle. The horse nickered softly in recognition. "He remembers me. He remembers everyone involved in that rescue," Walker confirmed. Horses don't forget those kinds of experiences. Ranger Bennett joined them, now wearing the new patch on his uniform sleeve that featured Dusty's silhouette and the words, "Wildlife Rescue Ambassador Program." "The governor's representative wants a photo with our four-legged hero," Bennett informed them. "And CNN is setting up for their interview in 10 minutes. Walker sighed good-naturedly. "Duty calls. Though I think Dusty enjoys the attention more than I do." As if understanding, the Palomino tossed his head with what could only be described as equine pride. Before leading Dusty away, Walker turned back to Rachel. You know, there's still an open invitation for you to join our advisory board. Your experience as both law enforcement and an equestrian would be invaluable. Rachel considered the offer. I'll think about it, though I'm not sure I have much to add to a room full of scientists and park administrators. You recognized what Dusty was trying to show us when others dismissed it as coincidence or wishful thinking, Walker reminded her. Sometimes practical expertise trumps academic credentials. As Walker and Dusty moved toward the media area, Bennett lingered behind with Rachel. Never thought I'd see the day when a horse got more press than a fossil poaching bust, the ranger remarked. People need heroes, Rachel replied simply. Even the four-legged kind. They both watched as Dusty stood patiently for photographs, seemingly understanding his new role as an ambassador between the wild and human worlds, a living bridge built from an extraordinary act of loyalty and training that had defied conventional wisdom about what animals could be taught to do in crisis situations. For Rachel, the ceremony marked more than just the recognition of an unusual rescue. It represented a fundamental shift in how humans might work with animals in wilderness settings, not as masters and servants, but as partners in survival. And in a world increasingly disconnected from nature, that lesson seemed more valuable than ever. 18 months after Dusty's dramatic highway stand, Rachel Monroe stood at the edge of a large crowd gathered outside the newly completed Southwestern Wildlife Emergency Response Training Center in Flagstaff. The modern facility, with its distinctive copper roof and sustainable design elements that blended harmoniously with the surrounding ponderosa pine forest, represented the tangible legacy of that extraordinary July day on Route 191. Hard to believe it all started with an injured horse blocking traffic, remarked Cole Bennett, now promoted to Chief Ranger for the Petrified Forest National Park. He had traded his daily uniform for a formal dress version, complete with polished buttons and ceremonial cord, for today's ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sometimes the smallest moments trigger the biggest changes, Rachel replied, surveying the gathering. The crowd included conservation officials, university researchers, donors, and local school children, all drawn by the remarkable story that had captured national attention and open wallets. The $7.2 million facility had been funded through an unprecedented coalition of federal grants, private donations, and corporate sponsorships, all catalyzed by the viral spread of Dusty's rescue story. What began as a local human interest piece had snowballed into international coverage after security camera footage from a stopped motorist's Tesla showed the wounded horse deliberately planting himself in the highway's center lane. Dr. Walker looks like he's finally enjoying the spotlight, Bennett observed, nodding toward the main stage where Ethan Walker stood confidently beside Arizona's governor. The scientist's previous academic reserve had mellowed into practiced public speaking as he became the reluctant face of the program that his research and Dusty's remarkable actions had spawned. He's had plenty of practice, Rachel said with a smile. I saw him on the Today Show last month. Dusty stole the segment, of course. As if on cue, an appreciative murmur rippled through the crowd as two handlers led Dusty toward the stage. The Palomino moved with dignified certainty, his golden coat gleaming in the autumn sunlight. At 7 years old, he carried himself with the presence of a much older horse, somehow conveying an almost regal awareness of his special status. Ladies and gentlemen, announced the event moderator, please welcome our guest of honor, the horse that launched a movement, Dusty. Applause erupted as the Palomino was brought to center stage. A special harness bearing the new center's logo rested comfortably across his chest, replacing the emergency tag that had once saved his handler's life. Dr. Walker stepped to the microphone, waiting for the applause to subside. 2 years ago, when I first proposed expanding the emergency equine response protocol to include other animal species, I was met with skepticism bordering on ridicule. He began, his voice carrying easily across the attentive crowd. Today, we stand before the physical embodiment of that vision, a center dedicated to exploring how animals of all kinds can be trained to assist in wilderness emergencies. He gestured to the building behind him. Inside these walls, researchers will develop protocols for dogs, horses, and even birds to serve as partners in search and rescue operations. Training programs will prepare wilderness first responders to work with these animal allies. And most importantly, The educational outreach will help everyday hikers and backcountry enthusiasts understand the remarkable capabilities of the animals that share our wild spaces. As Walker continued outlining the center's mission, Rachel reflected on how dramatically her own perspective had shifted since that fateful day. From initial skepticism about following a wounded horse into the wilderness to her current role as the law enforcement liaison on the center's advisory board, she had come to profoundly respect the potential for human-animal collaboration in crisis situations. None of this would have been possible without the extraordinary individuals who trusted their instincts that day on Route 191. Walker continued, his gaze finding Rachel in the crowd. Deputy Rachel Monroe and Ranger Cole Bennett didn't dismiss an injured horse as just another highway obstruction. They recognized something special was happening, something that defied conventional wisdom but aligned perfectly with what they knew about animals through their own experiences. Rachel felt a flush of embarrassment at the public recognition, though she'd grown somewhat accustomed to it over the months of media interviews and presentations at law enforcement conferences across the country. After the speeches concluded and the ceremonial ribbon was cut, Rachel found herself standing alone with Dusty while Walker was pulled away for photographs with dignitaries. The horse seemed to recognize her immediately, lowering his head to gently nudge her shoulder in greeting. "Hey there, celebrity," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Still remember our adventure, don't you?" Dusty's intelligent eyes gazed steadily back at her, seeming to communicate across the species barrier more effectively than words ever could. Dr. Walker eventually extricated himself from the officials and joined them. "He's never forgotten you," he observed. "Horses have remarkable memory for emotional experiences." "The feeling's mutual," Rachel admitted. "That day changed my perspective on a lot of things." Walker nodded thoughtfully. "Mine too. Before all this, I was just another academic with an unproven theory. Now," he gestured toward the building where dozens of researchers and students would soon be working, "now we're redefining what's possible." "The program's expanding to Yellowstone next spring?" Rachel asked, though she already knew the answer from board meetings. "And Yosemite the following year," Walker confirmed. "The protocols are being adapted for different terrains and wilderness challenges. Dogs for avalanche work, horses for desert and canyon environments. We're even looking at possibilities with ravens for aerial surveillance in dense forests." A group of elementary school children approached cautiously, clearly hoping for a chance to meet Dusty. With a nod from Walker, Rachel stepped aside to make room. "This is my favorite part," Walker said quietly as the children reverently stroked Dusty's neck, while a teacher explained how the horse had saved his human's life. Seeing him connect with kids who might grow up with a completely different understanding of what animals are capable of. As the afternoon progressed and the formal ceremony gave way to tours of the new facility, Rachel found herself standing at the edge of the property, looking out over the San Francisco peaks in the distance. The landscape seemed to stretch endlessly, a reminder of both the beauty and danger of the wilderness that surrounded them. "Penny for your thoughts," said a familiar voice. She turned to find Miguel Gomez, the SAR medic who had helped treat Dr. Walker during the rescue. He had since joined the center as its medical training coordinator. "Just reflecting," Rachel replied, "on how a routine call about traffic obstruction turned into all this." She gestured toward the center, where Dusty was now demonstrating emergency protocols for an enraptured audience. "That's how the biggest changes often happen," Gomez observed. "Not through grand plans, but through ordinary people responding to extraordinary circumstances." Rachel nodded, thinking about the chain of small decisions that had led to this moment. A biologist choosing to rehabilitate an unadoptable horse, a deputy deciding to follow that horse into the wilderness, a community rallying around the story of an animal's remarkable loyalty and intelligence. "You know what I remember most about that day?" she said after a moment. "It wasn't the dramatic helicopter rescue or even finding Dr. Walker alive. It was standing on that highway, looking into Dusty's eyes, and somehow knowing he was trying to tell us something important. That moment of connection across species, it felt almost sacred." Gomez nodded in understanding. "That's what this place is really about, isn't it? Not just training animals to perform emergency tasks, but recognizing that they've been trying to communicate with us all along. We just needed to learn how to listen." As the sun began to set over the Arizona landscape, casting long shadows across the new facility's courtyard, Rachel watched Dusty standing proudly among the humans whose lives he had changed forever. The wounded horse who had once blocked traffic on a desert highway had become something far greater, a symbol of possibility, a bridge between worlds, and living proof that the deepest connections often transcend language, species, and expectation. In that quiet moment, as the day's celebration wound down, Rachel Monroe understood that sometimes the most profound transformations begin not with grand visions or complex theories, but with a simple act of trust, the willingness to follow where an unlikely guide leads, even when the path ahead seems impossible to navigate alone. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon. If you've watched all the way to the end, comment, "I watched the whole thing," and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and be sure to check out the next video that appears in the end screen. It's going to be super emotional.